I'm making more money because I stutter than I do if I talk good.
Country music has always been about truth and real people, but Nashville often tried to hide any strange physical deformities and disabilities of these country stars. Ignoring the fact that these were not flaws, they were part of what made their voices so real and their songs hit so hard. Still, image mattered, and they did everything possible to keep these disabilities as secrets. Join us as we get into the details. Little Jimmy Dickens and the pain of being stared at. Some of the most legendary artists carried deep scars, lived with shocking disabilities, or faced deformities that Nashville executives quietly pushed out of sight, and one of which is Little Jimmy Dickens. Dickens was a country music legend known for his funny personality and heart. His hit, "Take an Old Cold Tater and Wait," showcased his lively spirit and honky-tonk style. Despite his talent, the industry was unsure how to handle his rare condition, often pushing him as a novelty. Camera work and costumes disguised his looks, keeping the focus on his music and charm. Behind the rhinestones and jokes, Jimmy lived with the pain of being stared at all his life, a truth Nashville quietly avoided.
Because when I came out with the old cold tater and sleeping at the foot of the bed, I kind of got branded, with those things. But I always had a ballad on the backside of all those novelty songs.
Dickens was born with a rare form of dwarfism that made him shorter than most children by the time he could walk, standing just over 4 feet tall. Doctors didn't know how to explain it back then, and his parents had no way to prepare him for the cruelty he'd face. By the time he hit adulthood, Dickens had developed not only his voice, but a thick shell to survive the constant comments, whispers, and shock from people. Standing barely over 4 feet tall, he made fun of his height on stage, turning jokes into charm. But behind the laughter was a man who had spent his entire life being stared at, and not always kindly. The country music industry wasn't sure what to do with him at first. Some promoters tried to push him more into the sideshow than into being a singer. But Jimmy had a talent that couldn't be denied. He could bring down the house with heartbreak songs or raise the roof with honky-tonk numbers. Over time, fans came to love him not just for his funny acts, but for his guts. Still, Nashville kept the camera angles tight, avoiding full body shots when they could. Publicists worked hard to push interviews away from his condition, and when he appeared on national television, his flashy outfits were more than fashion. They were armor. He made people laugh before they had a chance to mock him. Underneath the sparkle, Jimmy carried real pain. Not from his bones, but from years of being treated as less than human. He never let it show. Instead, he gave the world music filled with heart, humor, and the kind of strength only a lifetime of judgment could bring. This brings us to Boxcar Willie, someone with a voice bigger than his body. The shrinking frame of Boxcar Willie. Boxcar Willie was known for songs like Train, Train, Train and Hobo's Meditation, capturing the spirit of the wandering railroader. A charming performer, he built a career celebrating freedom and travel. Willie sang songs that told stories of loneliness, love lost at railway stops, and the freedom found riding the rails. But as he aged, his body began to betray him in ways the public never knew. Behind the scenes, he was slowly shrinking, his bones weakening, his muscles wasting. What the industry called getting older was something more serious. Boxcar suffered from a form of muscular atrophy that began quietly in his 50s. At first, he noticed he couldn't hold his guitar as long. Then came the trembling, the weakness in his legs, the slow stoop of his shoulders. Nashville didn't talk about it, and neither did he. This condition slowly weakened his body, shrinking his frame and causing tremors. The country music world chose to keep this hidden, fearing it would hurt his rugged image. Stagehands, camera crews, and managers worked to hide his physical struggles. Yet, Boxcar's powerful voice remained his true strength, shining even as his body grew frail. They covered it up with clever camera angles and backup players who could take over when needed. When he appeared on stage in his later years, he still wore his signature railroad cap and clothes, but his movements were stiff. His hands sometimes shook when he tipped his hat. The audience chalked it up to age. Only those close to him knew the truth. His body was disappearing bit by bit. Still, Boxcar's voice never left him. He kept singing until the very end, even when walking became difficult and holding a mic took effort. His final performances were more than music. They were an act of love and passion. He wasn't just singing about the train rolling on. He was proving that spirit doesn't shrink even when the body does. The disfigured hands that played pure magic. Roy Acuff was a pioneer of country music, famous for fiddle tunes like Great Speckled Bird and Wabash Cannonball. Before music, an illness and injury damaged his hands severely. Doctors doubted he could play again, but Roy adapted, learning new ways to hold his fiddle despite stiff, crooked fingers. The music industry kept his injury under wraps. Few knew the true struggle behind the magic notes. His hands told a story of pain turned to art, making his music not just heard, but deeply felt. He was seen by many as the king of country music long before there were slick studios or fancy videos. He made his name with that fiddle in hand, standing under the spotlight at the Grand Ole Opry. But few fans knew that the hands gripping that fiddle were far from perfect. He had suffered a terrible injury in his youth, a crash that left one of his hands permanently damaged. Before music, Roy was a star athlete, aiming for a baseball career. But sunstroke and a mysterious illness brought that dream crashing down. During recovery, he injured his hand so badly that he nearly lost function in several fingers. His doctors didn't think he'd be able to play anything, let alone master the fiddle. But Roy was stubborn. He taught himself to play with modified finger positions, twisting his hand at odd angles. His fingers never moved quite right, but his sound was pure and heartfelt. When TV came around, directors kept the camera focused on his face. Few ever saw how his fingers bent oddly across the strings. The Grand Ole Opry never talked about it, neither did Roy. He let the music speak for itself. That slightly haunting tone in his fiddle playing, it wasn't a crash. It came from fingers that fought for every note. He didn't just play music. He wrestled it out of his damaged hands and turned it into gold. This brings us to a singer who had to hide his teeth. Why Tennessee Ernie Ford hid his mouth. Tennessee Ernie Ford's booming voice carried hits like 16 Tons into American homes. Yet beneath that charm, he struggled with badly crooked teeth and jaw problems caused by poor dental care in his youth. This affected his speech and made smiling difficult. The industry worked hard to hide this, using lighting, makeup, and careful camera work to avoid showing his mouth. Ernie sometimes wore dentures, but often removed them between songs. Despite this, his voice remained powerful and full of emotion. The music hid his insecurities, letting him shine beyond his physical struggles. But behind that smooth voice was a man deeply embarrassed by something Nashville never let the cameras catch all in a bid to keep a perfect image. Ernie came from a poor mining family. Dental care was never an option. By the time he hit adulthood, several of his teeth were either missing or misaligned. He had trouble chewing and, at times, speaking clearly. But he had one of the most commanding voices in the business, and that covered everything. When he started appearing on television, makeup artists and lighting teams were instructed to keep shots above the chin. Interviewers were told to avoid wide-angle smiles or direct close-ups. Despite all that, he was never short on class. He dressed sharply, carried himself with dignity, and gave audiences the performance of a lifetime. His voice was his armor, and in that voice there was no sign of insecurity, just power, sorrow, and the weight of 16 tons of life. The Hidden Blindness of Leon Payne. Leon Payne wrote some of the saddest and most beautiful songs in country music. Hits like Lost Highway and I Love You Because became classics. But most people never knew he wrote them in the dark, because Leon was blind. Born with impaired vision, Leon became fully blind as a child. But the country music industry never made that public. Early on, they worried audiences would see his blindness as a weakness, so they downplayed it. Yet Leon learned to write songs in Braille and played guitar by feel, creating beautiful music full of emotion. His blindness gave him a unique gift, a deep sense of sound and feeling. Though hidden from public view, his music made him one of the country's most unforgettable voices. Photos were staged, liner notes skipped the detail, and interviews stayed away from the subject. Leon never let his condition stop him. He taught himself to play guitar by feel, learned to write songs in Braille or dictate them aloud, and could hear musical arrangements most people couldn't even imagine. His blindness didn't limit him, rather, it gave him focus. He could hear pain in a note, catch a broken heart in a melody. He performed with dark glasses, relying on others to guide him to the microphone. But once he started singing, he became something more than a blind man. He became the voice of every lost soul who ever wandered down a wrong road. Leon Payne didn't need eyes to see. His music was for him and everyone else. Jerry Lee Lewis shook pianos with fire and flair, but behind his wild moves was a crooked spine he rarely mentioned. The pain behind the fire. Jerry Lee Lewis was wild. Fire followed him wherever he went, from his thundering piano keys to the way he lived life like a runaway train. But even he couldn't outrun the pain in his back, a spinal condition he kept hidden for decades. By the time Jerry hit his 40s, his spine was twisting from a back condition which was worsened by years of reckless performances and bad landings from jumps off pianos. The damage didn't just cause pain, it threw off his balance and sometimes left him unable to stand without leaning on something. He masked it with energy. When he bent over the keys in that dramatic way, it wasn't always showmanship. Sometimes he was bracing against the pain. The public never saw the back braces, or the nights he couldn't move after a concert. His producers helped keep it all quiet. Jerry was still seen as dangerous and untouchable, not someone breaking down inside. In private, it was a different story. He struggled to sleep, could barely sit upright for long periods, and needed help getting out of cars. But he never stopped playing. He poured the fire of his pain into every performance. The way he attacked the piano wasn't just rebellion, it was survival. But why keep all this pain in when you can just let it out? Well, Nashville just has to maintain the image. This brings us to Barbara Mandrel, who smiled on stage, but behind the scenes, she quietly battled with something that never truly went away. The silence around Barbara Mandrel's pain. Barbara Mandrel was the face of 80s country television. She was beautiful, talented, and always smiling. But in 1984, her world changed forever after a horrific car crash that nearly ended her life. What wasn't shown on camera after that were the chronic injuries she carried forever. Barbara suffered multiple fractures, nerve damage, and a severe concussion that left her memory messed up for years. Though she survived, she was never the same. She dealt with headaches, fatigue, and long pain that made even simple movements difficult. But the industry had invested too much in her image to let the public see her broken. When she returned to the spotlight, everything was carefully controlled. Her wardrobe was altered to hide body braces. Interview questions were limited, performances were shorter, and lighting covered her stiffness. She smiled for the fans, but her body was screaming. Barbara eventually chose to walk away from the spotlight, not out of fading fame, but because her injuries made life on stage unbearable. She never blamed the business, but insiders say she felt pressure to hide the truth. She was a warrior who was just fighting a silent battle just to stand under those bright lights and be seen as the industry's favorite. This brings us to the man who later found a way to make jokes out of his disabilities. Mel Tillis, the voice that didn't stutter on stage.
A while ago, they asked me one time in Nashville, every year they have a pro celebrity. Right, every year they have one.
Mel Tillis was one of country music's most loved singers and songwriters. Born in the year 1932, he became known for turning personal pain into powerful songs. One of his most famous hits was Heart Over Mind, released in 1960. The song reached number 8 on the country charts. Fans were moved by his smooth voice and heartfelt lyrics. What made it even more special was that Mel Tillis had a condition many never guessed just by listening. He had a severe stutter. In everyday life, Tillis struggled to speak clearly. His stutter made conversations difficult, especially on stage or during interviews. But something strange happened when he sang. The stutter disappeared. Music gave him freedom. His voice, steady and clear in song, became his way of expressing himself without fear. But in Nashville, where image mattered just as much as sound, his stutter became something to hide.
And they asked me, when I went out there, they asked me my handicap, and I said, well, I stutter.
Producers and managers worried that audiences wouldn't accept a country star who stumbled over his words. They asked him not to talk much on camera. TV hosts sometimes skipped interviews with him. Publicists would write his quotes for newspapers, keeping his real speech out of the spotlight. Some even suggested he use scripted lines for live shows. But Mel Tillis didn't stay quiet. Over time, he began to speak openly about his stutter, even making jokes about it on stage. He turned what others saw as a flaw into part of his charm. Nashville may have tried to hide his condition, but Tillis showed that real talent doesn't need to be perfect. His music, especially songs like Heart Over Mind, proved that the heart always speaks louder than words. Hank Williams, the star. Nashville tried to keep standing, Hank Williams was one of country music's most powerful voices. Born in the year 1923, he wrote songs that touched people's hearts with their honesty and sadness. Hits like Your Cheatin' Heart and I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry made him a legend before he was even 30 years old. His voice was smooth and full of emotion, and fans felt like he was singing directly to them. But behind that strong voice was a body full of pain. He had a serious health problem that many didn't know about. He had spina bifida occulta, a condition that affected his spine and caused him pain for most of his life. The pain made it hard for him to stand or walk for long periods. It often left him exhausted after performances. But Nashville didn't want the world to see a weak or hurting star. People around Hank tried hard to hide his condition. He was told to stand tall, wear strong-looking cowboy clothes, and keep smiling for the cameras. Managers often blamed drinking when he missed shows or looked weak, even though much of it came from real physical pain. They wanted to protect his image as a tough country star, not a man quietly suffering. Hank sometimes turned to drinking just to get through his shows. His music grew sadder and more raw, as if he were crying out through his songs. Still, fans didn't see the whole story. They saw the suit, the hat, and the hits, but not the hidden spine condition that haunted him every day. Though Nashville tried to hide it, Hank's pain found its way into every note he sang, and somehow that's what made his music unforgettable. Ray Price, the smooth sound hiding a body in pain.
I tell you, Lori, it's kind of hard for me to say that I really don't know. I do and I don't. And I'm afraid to say that I did something when I didn't.
Ray Price was one of the most important voices in country music. Born in the early 1920s, he helped shape the smooth, polished sound that came to be called the Nashville sound. Known for songs like Crazy Arms and For the Good Times, he had a voice full of strength, warmth, and heartbreak. Fans saw him as a stylish, confident performer who moved with ease across the stage. But behind that graceful image was a man who battled constant pain. He suffered from severe back and leg problems for much of his life. It was something he rarely talked about. Even close fans did not know the full truth. Long before pain relievers became common in the music world, he was already fighting just to stand upright during shows. The damage had started early. Old injuries, years of performing, and stress from the road wore down his body. Yet, the show always had to go on. Nashville worked hard to keep his suffering out of sight. On album covers and in television appearances, he was always shown standing tall, dressed sharp, with no hint of discomfort. Behind the scenes, he often needed help walking or had to sit between takes. Stagehands knew to dim the lights if he needed to exit quietly. He would smile, hold the microphone steady, and make every fan believe he was fine.
I let the country boy know that he didn't have to come through the back door anymore, and that he could sing anywhere he wanted to, any kind of song he wanted to any kind of audience he wanted to.
His voice never gave away the pain. That was Ray Price's gift and his burden. Nashville gave him bright suits and polished stages, but no costume could fully hide the pain he carried night after night. The man who sang so beautifully also walked through life with aching legs and a spine that refused to let him rest. Ready for the next old country singer? Let's get into the details. The hidden health troubles of Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was one of the biggest names in country music. Born in 1932, he became famous for his deep, powerful voice and songs that told stories of pain, love, and life. Hits like Ring of Fire and I Walk the Line made him a legend. He was known as the Man in Black because of his dark clothes and strong, serious style. But behind the tough image, Johnny Cash struggled with health problems. He had a condition called autonomic neuropathy, which affected his nerves and made his body weak and painful. This illness was not well known at the time, and he had to hide much of his pain from the public. He also battled usage for many years. These struggles sometimes made it hard for him to perform and live a normal life. Nashville and the music industry wanted to keep Johnny's image strong and almost perfect. They often ignored his health problems and did not talk much about his pain or struggles. The record labels and promoters focused on his music and his tough, cool image. They wanted fans to see Johnny Cash as a strong hero, not as a man fighting illness and pain. Even with these hidden challenges, Johnny Cash kept making music that touched millions of people. His voice and songs still live on as some of the most important in country music history. Lefty Friselle, the voice shaped by a facial weakness. Lefty Friselle was one of the most important country singers in the 1950s. He became famous for songs like If You've Got the Money, I've Got the Time, Long Black Veil, and Saginaw, Michigan. Many other singers tried to copy his style because it was so different and special. But what made Lefty's singing unique was a small problem with the muscles on one side of his face. Lefty had a weakness in the muscles on the right side of his face. This made one side drop slightly, and somehow it affected how he sang. Because of this weakness, some of the vowel sounds he made seemed to slide or leak out to the side. This created a soft, smooth, and almost lazy sound that became part of his signature style. Without this small weakness, his voice might have sounded sharp and ordinary, but instead, it had a special charm that many people loved. Well, for Nashville, on the other hand, they wanted stars to look perfect in photos and on stage. Photographers would carefully use soft lighting and point cameras at angles that made his face look more even. This was to hide the right side of his face, but somehow, he did not try to hide it completely. He often tilted his cowboy hat low on the stronger left side of his face. This helped the shadows fall in the right way, making the defects less visible. It was a clever way to hide the difference without hiding himself. Over time, Lefty's facial weakness got worse. As he got older, the muscles became more tired, and soon the droop grew stronger. Despite the worries, on stage, he still smiled with that uneven grin. That smile made fans feel safe and sure they were listening to a real, honest man. His imperfection became a symbol of authenticity in country music. Record executives sometimes felt uneasy because of Lefty's health and the way his face looked. They worried about how it might affect his career, but Lefty never let this stop him from being himself. His voice and style were too special to hide, and the small facial weakness helped make his singing stand out. Instead of being ashamed, Lefty's uneven voice and face became part of what made him a legend. Lefty Friselle's story shows how a physical difference, something many might see as a flaw, can become a gift. His voice carried the feeling of real life, soft, imperfect, but full of heart. Nashville's attempts to cover his facial weakness could never erase what made Lefty so unforgettable. His music and style live on as proof that true talent shines brightest, even when it comes with a little imperfection. The country music industry cared deeply about image, often pushing artists' disabilities and deformities out of public view. For these stars, this meant hiding real struggles behind carefully staged photos and selective camera angles. Yet these hidden battles gave their music a rare honesty and power. The silence about their disabilities was a form of protection, but also a reminder of the times when the industry valued looks over truth, showing the very pain that made country music so real. These legends didn't ask for pity. They didn't cry out for help. Instead, they chose music. When their bodies betrayed them, they answered with verses. When pain knocked them down, they rose with choruses. The world saw stardom and showmanship. But behind the stage lights, these artists were quietly battling their brokenness. Their pain shaped their music in ways the public never knew. They weren't just stars, they were warriors in cowboy boots. Nashville may have hidden its suffering, but its stories deserve to be told now. It wasn't perfection that made them legends, it was perseverance. Their bodies may have failed them, but their voices, they never broke. What are your best memories of these old country stars? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.